Good morning, and good morning, everyone. Please take your seats. Please take your seats, and we'll begin the General Officer Flag Officer panel session for ITSEC 2011. My name is Fred Lewis, and I'm the president of the National Training and Simulation Association, and I have the honor and the privilege of being the moderator for this panel activity this morning. It's become a tradition here with ITSEC to have this General Officer Flag Officer panel here immediately following the plenary session, and to hear from key leaders in terms of across the spectrum within DoD and within the Homeland Security with the Coast Guard, to hear what the training trends are in those various services, and from the Joint Staff perspective, and from Homeland Security's perspective, and from the policies perspective as well. So we have an outstanding panel here today with these key decision makers, key leaders from the various services and departments and organizations. The rules of engagement here this morning will be that I'll introduce the panelists. They'll each come up to the stage and take their place at the table. Once they're all assembled here, we'll engage in some formal presentations by each one of the panelists. Once that's concluded, we'll enter into a question and answer period with you, the audience. We're very interested in getting into a dialogue with all of you and to hear your questions, your concerns, and so forth. And what we're going to do, the way we're going to handle that, is that in your programs that you received when you walked in the main entrance were some question cards, sample blank question cards. So if you'll fill those out with your questions, please write legibly. I'm the one that has to try to interpret what your question is, so make sure that it's legible, and you know that a fighter pilot can understand it and read what you've written. I'll ask the questions of the panelists. Oh, by the way, when your question is done, hold it up in the air, and we'll have two beautiful ladies who will be walking up and down the aisle, picking those questions up and delivering them to me here at the stage. So, without further ado, let me introduce to you your panel for this morning. And I commend to you their individual biographies that are in the program, so you have a better understanding of the person that we have up here at the table, what their experience level is, and the kinds of achievements that they've been successful at in the courses of their careers. To begin, from OSD, we're honored this morning to have Dr. Laura Juner. Dr. Juner. Representing the Army, we have Major General Nick Justice. From the United States Marine Corps, Major General Ray Fox. From the United States Air Force, Major General Brent Williams. From the United States Army, but representing the Joint Staff, Major General Fred Rudesheim. From the United States Coast Guard, Rear Admiral Steve Melling. And from the United States Navy, Rear Admiral Randy Lahr. A couple more bars of that last song, please. Oh, I'm only kidding. Now, to begin our presentation from our panelists, I will ask Dr. Juner to begin. Laura? Laura, you can do it right from your place if you want to. That'd be fine.
Sure. You don't have to ask me twice. Thank you for inviting me. As I was preparing to come here and speak to a few thousand people with a jumbotron, my colleague introduced me to a marine biologist who was pretty cool. And when I told him that the topic was on challenges for training, he said, you know, this is a lot like some of the challenges we encountered with protein folding. So I jumped to my nearest Google toolbar and Googled protein folding, and I found out it's the process by which protein structures assume its functional form, something about polypeptide folds morphing from their characteristic random coil to their final functional form. It's okay, I still don't know what it means either, but I do appreciate the fact that it is very hard, when you throw the word random in, it's very difficult to model such things, especially going from one random state to a particular state. I don't think at this point you'll be surprised by how they solved this problem. They went out to a group of gamers, and they gave these gamers some rules and threw out the problem to them, and lo and behold, they solved it. A decentralized group of motivated, brilliant people solved it. And it's in that spirit that I'm going to bring some of the challenges I'm facing to you, because I think you can help. We talked about the first challenge, and when I was initially putting together my speaker notes, I was going to talk about the uncertainty of our fiscal environment. Well, I'm pretty certain now it's bad. It's either bad or horrible, I'm not quite sure. And then we've also got the issue of our current operations. These operations have filled our tool chest with some remarkable capabilities. They were not easy to create. We do have an extraordinary force, and we need to think about not only continuing to support these operations up until the day they conclude, but also how we archive and protect and maintain some of these capabilities going forward. We've also got the challenge of an uncertain future environment. This is not a new challenge. We have never been certain of our operational environment. We are always trying to figure out where on the irregular conventional spectrum we might be. We do know that we've sacrificed some of our cutting-edge conventional capabilities to make sure that we can respond to today's conflicts, and we're going to need to figure out how to build them back again in a fiscally constrained environment. The final challenge is that we're going to have to get better at working with partners, foreign and domestic. And a lot of these partners don't speak the same language we do. Now, I know you think I'm talking about our foreign, outside our country partners. I'm also talking about folks within our own country. We're really good at establishing communities that speak their own language. If you've ever overheard the conversation of two supply corps officers, for example, you'll know it's almost encrypted. They have their own language. IT professionals, same thing. We're very good at this, but we don't have time when an operation unfolds to suffer the tyranny of a Tower of Babel. We're going to have to get better at communicating with each other. We have different language, we have different cultures, but we have to move towards one common goal. We also, with our partners, have the tyranny of distance and time. Be they foreign partners or domestic partners, most don't have the time to devote people to train with us. So we're going to have to get better at working around those obstacles. So one of the common solutions to this is that we'll be more adaptable. We've heard about that here. Well, I'm kind of picky. When I hear something like adaptable, I want to know exactly what we're talking about. So as it turns out, adaptability is inherent to the biological state, right? It's about having a healthy basis And from then, morphing, moving, sensing what an enemy is doing and being able to outpace that enemy, whether that enemy is an invading virus or another force that wants to do us harm. Interestingly enough, adaptability does not mean ready for everything. Our bodies aren't sheltered from every immunity out there. The secret of survival is to start again with a healthy base, to be able to sense an intruder and be able to adapt to create the right response when that intruder really does start breaking down the door. So what does that mean for us? Again, in a fiscally constrained environment, what's our healthy base? What capabilities are we going to keep? Well, logic says you keep those capabilities that are long lead capabilities that we can't create quickly, whether they're large weapon systems or whether they're the human capital type long lead capabilities associated with being a seasoned fighter pilot or a pro with language and culture. We also need to keep those capabilities that are critical, for which there are no substitutes, for those operations that we think our best guess that we're going to have to provide. And then another way of thinking is to keep core foundational capabilities, the essence of our force from which we can adapt fast. These capabilities have to be, we have to train them and operate them in a way that can be independent of a specific functional form. In other words, they have to be scalable. They have to be able to operate in geographic dispersed environments. And again, that scalability, not just joint, but multiple levels of partnership. We also need a sensing mechanism. This is probably the hardest part and most important part of an adaptive force. You can't adapt if you don't see it coming. Now, I'm not talking about crystal ball. I'm not talking about predicting the future. I'm talking about being sensitive enough to changes in the geopolitical environment, the technological environment, weather, economies, what have you. Just sensitive enough that we should start questioning the basis for the force we've built. This is tough to do. We've done it before. We've done it World War II. We did a pretty good job at that. The question I have for you, the challenge I have for you is how do we teach people to sense? It's a wicked signal extraction problem. How do we embed that into our training so that we train, again, in a way that's sensitive to a changing environment? Finally, given that we need to change, that we have a signal from our environment that we're going to need to surge a capability that we may not have a lot on the shelf, how do we pre-position ourselves to do that? This may mean maintaining seed corn, kernels of capability, to form a train the trainers type concept. But if we're going to do that, which type of seed corn do we need to keep? How do we keep these folks on their A game? Because we all know training, you don't know something until you've actually tried to teach it. So we can't let the skills of our seed corn atrophy. And then how do we grow those capabilities? How do we generate these forces quickly? How do we protect our infrastructure? How do we make sure that we create training enablers that can surge these forces quickly? Perhaps we should consider an operational experimentation and design unit. Such a unit would develop new and innovative tactics and techniques and procedures to help us evolve. One of the foundational elements of what I've been talking about is the human capital element. We're really used to focusing on the big weapon systems, and they're important, there's no question. But we're also noticing an increased asset in our human capital development. And again, in an adaptive force, perhaps we don't teach people what to think, we teach them how to think, how to evolve, how to trust their instincts enough to make decentralized decisions. This is an important endeavor. We talked a little bit, I think, before we talked a little bit about the art of the intelligent tutors. I think that this is an area that we really need your help in. The application of these goes far beyond the United States and DoD. This gets to how we job train in general, how we train our children, how we adapt in all sorts of economic sectors. But most specifically for our discussion here, it's how it maybe hold the key to how we grow forces on very little notice. It's also very much related to the notion of soft power, and this is another critical element where I think we need continued evolution. Live and virtual training mixtures to help us with overcome some of the tyranny of our joint training problems. Also, helping with the language and culture aspects, helping with the tactics, helping with negotiating the train and assist type missions. Soft power will be tempting to give up after these missions conclude. We tend to have that track record as a country. We have these type of operations, then we swear we're not going to do it again up until the moment that we actually do. So keeping on the cutting edge of developing these technologies is probably a good idea. It also, even to the extent that these operations conclude, building partnerships won't, engagements won't. So figuring out, again, how to work with folks who are not co-located with us is going to be an important challenge going forward. So these are all pretty tough. They're tough with an infinite amount of resources. The adaptability piece actually overlays the increased challenge of potentially limited time. It's easy to wallow in how difficult these are, but I do believe necessity is the mother of invention. It is the basis for evolution. I think in our protein folding example, that example does hold true. I think that groups like you, who are filled with dedicated and brilliant folks with a very basic understanding of some ground rules, and I think that's what we're talking about today, can solve what most of us couldn't if we tried to do it centrally. Again, the applications here are far broader than just DoD, but we do need you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Juner. And our next panelist to address us is Major General Nick Justice.
Well, I think what we ought to really talk about is what's on your heart, and that's money. So I want to tell you I'm competing with you. And ma'am, I'd like to volunteer to be the design unit that you just proposed, and I think General Walker and I might meet you right after the panel and discuss how we can advance that with the Army. We've got
Problem one solved, see?
See, right there. Now, I want to start out with a slide, investing in S&T. So flip that next slide, please. That's what my organization, Research Development and Engineering Command, that's what we're looking at doing as we make decisions to invest in S&T. The technologies in this group and this industry may be the best positioned technologies for helping us through the constraints that we're going to go through in the budgets than any other industry that we deal with in the military. I can't imagine being in Warren, Michigan, talking to a bunch of vehicle producers out in industry facing the same budget cuts, because the technologies that we use here are the technologies that allow us to train, but also to design, to develop new ideas, new concepts, and to run through with cost-saving procedures how to save those operational and sustainment costs we have in our force. I just take these 5 bullets here, and I would talk to the last one for you. We try to partner with the people that are delivering the systems, those program offices that are delivering the systems to the operational force, and try to find ways to inject new technologies into the current existing designs and continue to modernize them. Once an infrastructure is in place, it's often much cheaper to modernize the infrastructure than it is to replace it with a completely new infrastructure. If I could illustrate that, how many of you would purposely go design broadband in a model that you have in DSL? If you could start from scratch, you would go to wireless wideband access. But if you have an infrastructure of twisted pair in millions and millions of homes in America, you take a bridging strategy to go forward. And that's what I would suggest that we need to think about today. What are the bridging strategies from the infrastructures and fleets that we occupy today, and how do we move forward? S&T for the current force, my next slide. Really what we're trying to do is unburden the soldiers and the small combat units that are out there, as General Walker so well put this morning, that are in the only fair fight that we have in our military. But we're trying to do so in many ways, and it's not just always the physical. It's not reducing the weight, it's reducing the burden to them in many aspects. In time, can we get training to them so that we can make their time more precious and more dedicated to what we're doing? Can we actually reduce the physical load? Can we reduce the mental load, workload that they have to operate so many separate devices by integrating technologies into each other? Systems engineering becoming one of the forefront ideas in the Department of Defense after a long, long time of it being on the back burner. How do we take not only that cognitive skill and integrate it to the physical workload that the soldier has and make them better prepared for that, but also their mental and spiritual aspects to relieve the burdens that they face? I think we're going to have to modernize through our repair programs. So not necessarily new programs, but how do I take sustainment programs that have not been viewed this way and modernize through improved parts and new technologies that are inserted into older systems? I think you'll find that oftentimes we don't do that. In fact, we have processes that say, bring it back to the original operating standard, the old 1020. We need to do just like you see industry do in our business today. I need software version upgrades and hardware modernization upgrades that give us a long life cycle of what we're doing. We know that that's how we've saved money in the past, and I know we can in the future. Slide. So what about our future force? If we know that our operation and our sustainment costs in our ground combat fleet are saved in flight simulators, driving simulators, and that the models that we produce also find reliability issues that we can improve on, can you imagine having the first version of anything and not improve it after its life cycle has modernized? That's where we're targeting, that's where we're headed. We need to invest in those virtual worlds and in virtual humans that allow us to interact and create realism for that operational unit that is not going to have the ability to own the complete kit, the most modern kit. As they start to go into a transition where they replace the unit on the front line, they need to have the ability to interact. Some of the things that we need to do, the real clips that you see out there, it's not just about training. How do I also use the technologies in this industry to do more? How do they do mission rehearsal with this technology? How do they actually execute operations using the models and simulations that we have integrated into their real-time operations? How do they then AAR, the after-action review process, their operations and pass that real-time first-hand knowledge to the next team going out on that mission? Not in days or a year rotation from now, but tomorrow morning or the next relief that comes online. Those are the places where this technology can really make a difference. I think oftentimes we bind ourselves in a box with the technologies in this industry and we call it training, and we don't find the other places we need to embed it in. I would like to see in the operations where we're recording real time what goes on, and that becomes the next wave of interactive virtual world training through that real film, and you just find and be able to tag the key points that you learn from and be able to adapt it. I think what you're going to find is sensors are going to play a critical part because they give us data in very small amounts. And I need to be feeding real live data into these simulations so that we can correlate them much quicker and so that we know the reliability of the simulations and how accurate we can predict what we're going to do. I need to be able to put high-performance computing on the network to run all the preparations we did, find opportunities where we see things with sensors out in the battlefield to start to change and be able to move the operational unit and anticipate branches and sequels to what our plans are. There are many opportunities, and if I was in industry, I'd want to be in this industry in this day of a downturn defense economy. Thank you.
Thank you, General Justice. And now from the United States Marine Corps, General Ray Fox.
Hey, good morning out there. Reminds me of a quote I got from the Assistant Commandant about 4 months ago. He says, okay, we're out of money, time to start thinking. And something we're all going to live with in probably the next 10 years. Having a pretty good budget background, I don't see this getting better for a while, so let's figure out what we can do. As we look across the Marine Corps, and we're the smallest one on the stage up here besides the Coast Guard in investment in this field, but a couple things become pretty obvious, especially in our ground systems, that our simulation is complementary to really our live training. It's really the crawl and the walk part of our live training. You go in a simulator, you do this, and then you're ready to go out and do it for live. I'm not sure that's where we need to go in the future. The other thing that's kind of unique is most of our demand signal for the last 10 years since OIF kicked off and through OEF has been on urgent-ons, and we had to rapidly field a solution on training effectiveness. It was all about quickly getting a system out to solve a problem that was prevalent in theater right now. That's going to change, obviously, very rapidly here as we come into a very different fiscal environment, in a different world environment where we're not forward deployed in hot zones. We're forward deployed in places prepared to fight those contingencies when they happen. The other unique thing, if you look at in all services, we have some kind of training manual that tells us what we're going to train to. In the Marine Corps, the training readiness manuals. And we sometimes forget the readiness part of the training. Everybody all the Iron Majors love to sit around and talk about how many more times they could go to the field and how much more ammunition they could shoot. But very few people understand the tie to readiness and how the training and readiness manuals of each service tie in the events that make that unit capable at the end of a period. In the Army, it's the R4Gen model. In the Marine Corps, we don't have a name for it. We just call it training and readiness to get to that point. The point is, human beings by nature like to have technology around them. They don't like to substitute technology for live things. So we have to mandate that at our level. We've done it in aviation for a long time. Everybody knows in the commercial airline industry, a lot of pilots who flew you down here the other day could quite likely had been their first flight in an aircraft in months. They've been flying in simulators their entire time, the rest of the time. In aviation for a long time in all the services, we've taken flight hour money and bought simulators and have reaped a cost savings over the long term. So as we made our simulators the last few years very effective, we didn't make them efficient. We didn't ever look at, on the ground side especially, how much less ammunition am I going to use? How many less road miles am I going to drive? How much less maintenance do I have to do to return those cost savings? I will make a point that efficiency is going to be equally important to effectiveness. This gets challenging when we get into especially systems like training JTACs, which is a joint type program. In other words, the Air Force's accreditation and desire could be different than the Marine Corps or the Army's or the Navy's. So we have to make sure our processes allow us to take the value of simulation and apply it to the point where we can reduce sorties required to train a JTAC. Right now we reduce it by 4. My guess with the fidelity that's available out there, we could totally train a JTAC without ever putting them with a live aircraft if we do it right. That's the kind of things we need to do. So the key performance parameters on every system has to be not only about effectiveness, but also a mandated cost savings, or we don't buy the system. Because why would we buy it if we're not going to save the other money because we don't have much money to begin with? That gets tough in making sure the fidelity is there, that the duty experts are truly in the room as we go through the design phase and the software development to make sure that we have the right system produce the right results at the end. So it can't be done in some dark back room. It's got to be the interface that General Walker talked about this morning, with the operators actually being with the designers to make sure we get it right from the first step. The last thing I'll leave you with is, as we go through these very tough budget times, and we will go through them, I would ask you all, when you talk to senior leaders, to explain to them that, you know, it's not the gear that makes us the world's most effective fighting force. I'm talking about the joint force here. It's not the gear, it's the individual soldiers, sailor, airmen, and Marines, and it's the training and education they received. And we are morally corrupt as a nation if we don't train and educate our soldiers, sailor, airmen, and Marines, because they will end up in battle somewhere, someplace that we can't even predict right now. Thank you.
Thank you, General Fox. Now for the United States Air Force, Major General Brent Williams.
Yes, sir, thank you. I'd like to pick up on a point that my friend General Fox mentioned and talk to you a little bit more broadly about how we in the Air Force are thinking about training as it relates to readiness. And I think that's extremely important for our industry partners to understand what we're thinking about in terms of readiness, because, you know, we've got whatever it is, 250,000 or 300,000 square feet of a lot of really cool things out there. But we've got to focus in a very specific way on those things that are going to provide the right training to deliver readiness. And I can tell you, and Dr. Juner and I have been in a couple of sessions, and we can attest that readiness is an extremely hot topic in the Pentagon right now. To the credit of our senior leaders, the emphasis is on not just cutting the budget to cut the budget, but to understand that there's needs to be a strategy-based approach to this, and that we need to resource to a particular strategy. I would say the challenge with that is that everybody has a different view of how to define readiness. I can tell you in the Air Force that we struggle with our external audience to talk about readiness and what's that mean. You know, everybody'd like to get to simple things like hours per crew member per month, or flying hour program. You know, one 10-hour sortie in a fighter is a lot different than 10 one-hour sorties. $50 to fly a glider at the Air Force Academy compared to a much larger figure to fly a B-2 makes it very hard to get down to simple figures. And so as a result, we end up looking in the past, I would argue, at a resource-based equation where we look at how many people are assigned, how well they're trained, how much equipment do we have against what's authorized, and then the condition of that equipment. Very dynamic relationship between all four of those factors, but that only tells part of the story. you've got to look at that resourcing against a particular strategy. And I would argue that that readiness equation forces you to think about risk in two ways. First of all, there's the strategy aspect of it, and as we have proven over the history of human warfare, that the only thing we know about strategy is that we're going to get it wrong, and our job is just not to get it too wrong. And so we have got to take risk in terms of determining how we are going to design our force to be able to deal with whatever comes in the future, because we don't know what that is. And as resources draw down, we have less of an opportunity to prepare across the entire force, and so we've got to kind of pick, I think, a certain scenario that drives us to do things, and then we've got to trust that the force we've designed is adaptable, as Dr. Juner said, to other scenarios. So for instance, we could take a very high-end scenario and design our force around that, and then trust that that force will be adaptable enough to handle the other spectrum. Or we could design against a very low-end scenario and then try to figure out what risk we're taking across the rest of it. The other area we have to think about risk is in terms of warning. How much time will we have to prepare? How much time will we have to adapt if we didn't get the strategy exactly right? That becomes very important for the Air Force in terms of our requirements to respond very quickly in a number of scenarios, and that drives how we think about suggestions of tiered readiness or rotational readiness or those sorts of things. So once you've thought about resourcing and then put that in the context of ready for what, then you can start deciding where am I going to direct my training, where am I going to start putting my dollars in order to make things happen. And a common theme that you hear among the services right now is that we all realize that more than likely we're going to get smaller, but we're all going to avoid the concept of a hollow force. And there's at least as many definitions of a hollow force as there is of readiness. And so what does that mean? And I could give you my own 3 or 4 definitions, but the point of that is that we have to make sure that whatever force we have, as General Walker talked this morning, is capable of executing the missions that would be potentially assigned to us. And I think the challenge is now, as we look at the budget drawdowns, is we spend a lot of time talking about what we're not going to do, and I think maybe we should spend more time talking about what we are going to do. The healthy base that Dr. Juner referred to for the Air Force, I refer to that as the essence of the Air Force. What is it that we have to absolutely make sure we can do? And for the Air Force, I would argue that's to be able to touch any spot on the earth. Maybe that's with a nuclear weapon, maybe it's a gravity bomb, maybe it's a special operator, maybe it's a humanitarian assistance team. But we have to do that in, I would argue, seconds, hours, or seconds, minutes, and hours. We frequently don't have weeks or months to prepare for that. So understanding how much risk you're going to take is extremely important. And so we have to figure out, amongst all those resource categories, where we put the next dollar in order to maximize readiness. And some of those dollars have to go into training. And I would argue that for the Air Force that we have 3 major training venues that we need to target so that we can start making ourselves more ready for whatever the future holds. We've been doing combat operations for the last 20 years, intensely for the last 10 years, focused on a very narrow spectrum of Air Force capabilities. And so as we look to the future, we've got to make sure that we can provide the training for our airmen so that they can be able to execute that mission, that healthy base, that essence of the Air Force. And we are not going to do anything alone. None of the services do. It's going to be joint and it's going to be coalition. And I'd like to just briefly touch on 3 venues which I think where we have to focus our training, and these are all joint and coalition focuses. First for us is Red Flag. We've been doing Red Flag for more than 35 years. That's not an Air Force exercise anymore. That's an air power, an airspace and cyber exercise. It includes the joint and coalition force all the time, but we've got some significant challenges with being able to execute Red Flag. We've got challenges with being able to provide threat simulators that allow us to train in contested and degraded environments. We've got encroachment challenges, and I'm not talking about encroachment in terms of people wanting to build buildings on ranges. It's encroachment from energy development, it's frequency and spectrum encroachment. All of those things that we need to be able to do full spectrum training in Red Flag are things that we need to address and understand how the mix of live, virtual, and constructive facilitates that. Another exercise that's very much joint coalition is our virtual flags. And I don't know how many are familiar with that, but that's run out of our Distributed Training and Operations Center down in Kirtland. I attended the coalition virtual flag about 2 months ago. And that's our capability really to focus at the operational level of war, work command and control, and at the same time bring in a virtual constructive environment that was literally from all over the world, Australians and Brits and U.S. partners across the joint force. Our biggest challenge there, I would argue, is being able to have a network that allows us to bring this type of training up whenever we need it. We basically right now start about 6 months in advance to build the environment that we need to do a virtual flag. Within that, I would argue that it's the multi-level security, it's all the certification and accreditation work that has to be done. So how can we get to a point that we can bring up a virtual flag at a moment's notice to bring in whoever can participate at this time without going through 6 months of preparation to do that? And then the final training venue that I think is extremely important, which is not an Air Force training opportunity, but it leveraged the work that we've done in Red Flag in the last 35 years, and that was Cybercom's Cyber Flag that they conducted at Nellis about a month ago. And so that was an opportunity to, in this case, bring the joint force together and to work cyberspace operations at the tactical level. Red Flag was always designed to give that new airman his or her first 10 missions in theater, but in a training environment. And what Cybercom did was capitalize on that concept of Red Flag to do Cyber Flag. And I'll tell you what, as somebody who spent 28 years in training as a fighter pilot to be the J6 at PACOM, it was very cool to go there and see those young men and women from all of the services fighting. As one person talked about in the debrief, we were dogfighting on the network. It was the coolest thing you've ever seen. And they were extremely excited about what they're doing, and certainly our ability to operate in cyberspace is critical. But again, we need a persistent range. It's very hard to duplicate the entire internet in a training environment. So how do we get a capability to provide the training environment that we need for our cyberspace operators and our cyberspace warriors across the joint force to be able to exercise in an effective way? And so throughout there is woven the concepts of live, virtual, and constructive. As General Fox mentioned, though, there's a right mix. How big is the L? How big is the V? How big is the C? And I think we'll have a little bit of an opportunity to talk about that tomorrow. So I would just close by saying that it's not training for training's sake. We can't buy every cool app that's out there. There's a lot of neat stuff, but we've got to focus very narrowly on those things that are to give us the most readiness for our investment, whether it's in personnel, whether it's in equipment, or whether it's in supply or training. And so certainly training is a huge part of that, and we've got to be able to provide to you those avenues that we think are most important. So thank you for your attention, and I'll look forward to any questions.
Thank you, General Williams. Just a reminder to the audience, think about your questions, and if they are starting to emerge, start writing them down and hold them up in the air, and our collectors will be by and pick them up from you. And now to talk to us about the joint perspective, Major General Fred Rudeschein.
Well, thanks, Fred. Morning to all of you. I've got the greatest job in the world. First of all, I'm on the joint staff in every way, shape, or form that you can see, except that I'm not in the Pentagon. I'm down in Suffolk. I don't have to fight the traffic. I don't have to worry about the Beltway, but we get to contribute to the joint force, and so it's fantastic. And I'm joined by about 1,000 of my closest friends down there. We have more than doubled the size of the joint staff. We're in an unprecedented experiment to do something that has heretofore not been done. The joint staff, as many of you know, is focused upward. It's focused on responding to the chairman, to the vice, to the joint directors, and preparing best military advice to go into the interagency and provide that advice. We actually have to do some work, and we do it down in Suffolk. And I don't mean that pejoratively. What I mean is we're the action arm for the Joint Staff J7. And what I want to spend the next few minutes doing is answering that very vexing question, what happened to Joint Forces Command? And I'm going to, at the conclusion, I would hope that you have at least a clear understanding of what remains of Joint Forces Command, certainly when it comes to joint training and joint development. As I am the Deputy Director, J7, Joint and Coalition Warfighting. We're down on a Suffolk campus, formerly the J7 of Joint Forces Command. We're an amalgam of both what was once J7 and J9. Next slide, please. You know, if we'd asked the chairman to give us a quote that spoke to the theme of this conference, I don't think we could have come up with a better one. This is not, we didn't ask him, but in fact, what he said in the top left-hand corner of the slide, I think, is quite appropriate when you look at preparing the force for now and securing the future. So I'd take a look at that for a second. We have work to finish the current conflict, but it should be just as clear that we have work to do in preparing for an uncertain future. Our work must result in a joint force, responsive, decisive, versatile, interdependent, and affordable. And he said that talking to SASC last July. How do we go about doing that? Now, my boss is Lieutenant General Flynn, Marine Corps, great American. He didn't inherit an envelope when he got to his desk that said, "This is how you are, the J7," because he is a 3-star J7 on the Joint Staff, where traditionally it was a 1-star. With the disestablishment of Joint Forces Command, that was one of the decisions made, is that we were going to fleet the J7 for training development, joint training development, to a 3-star position, and you couldn't have picked a better first J7 3-star than Lieutenant General Flynn. When you look at the diagram in the lower left, this is his vision of how it is that we do our job. And so I would ask you to just follow with me. In the center is the why of what we do, and the why drives everything. And it's this thing called jointness. We are the repository for jointness. That sounds like a fairly heavy burden. We have a lot of partners in this, but that's our inheritance. As Joint Forces Command was disestablished, we are the repository for jointness and the execution of jointness. And so how do we go about doing that? Well, we go about doing that by improving, sustaining, by discovering and creating. And so those are the 4 axes, if you will, and efforts that we're ongoing in order to be able to deliver jointness. And then the what, the actual product, of course, is a joint trained and adaptable force. So that's the vision. That's how we're moving ahead. The focus areas that you see on the right, I'd ask you to pay attention to those, because those are the chairman's focus areas. When we look at what we work on in both joint training and joint development, we look to see if they match these focus areas. Now, these certainly they're current, and they could change as priorities will change. But these are the focus areas that the chairman has delivered to us vis-a-vis the J7. So the next slide is our mission statement. Once again, highlights that we are both in the present and future. So, and I need to really emphasize this point. You know, our name is Joint and Coalition Warfighting. The C in that is important. We've got 19 nations, 28 liaison officers that live with us in Suffolk. And so those liaison officers empower their respective countries to be able to participate with us to the broadest extent possible in joint training and in joint development. And we're looking for more partners. We understand, as everyone does, the need for partnership and the coalition effort, both in training and, of course, in execution. Next slide. Now, this is a money slide, and it's an organizational chart, but let me just tell you, there's a couple things on here I really want to emphasize. The timeline across the top is important because this has been a fast-moving train. So on the far left, on the top left there, you see that in 9 August of 2010, I was looking at a television screen in the Pentagon. I happened to be in the Pentagon for some business that day up from Suffolk, and somebody said, "You want to listen to this? The Secretary of Defense is going to make an announcement." And it was a Monday. General Mattis had just departed for CENTCOM that past Friday. Of course, that was the announcement that, amongst the other things, and there was many other things that he said, but our Secretary said, we are going to, and his word then was, eliminate Joint Forces Command. Now, that was a bit of a shock to all of us. Virtually no one knew anything about it. And so we went about the business in the ensuing months of determining just what that meant. First thing that happened was the word changed to disestablish. And that's not just wordcraft. It was, wait a minute, we can't just eliminate, because eliminate is fairly terminal. Everything just goes away, turn off the lights, everybody goes home. And there was a number of functions that were being performed by then Joint Forces Command that had to endure. So how were we going to do that? So it became a significant planning effort to determine what was going to remain, what was going to actually be completely eliminated, and then what would be transferred. And so I just want to focus on that which remained, because the disestablishment, the actual disestablishment, came a year later, much faster, I think, than some predicted. So 4 August was the official disestablishment date for Joint Forces Command. And here we are today, a scant 4 months later, as part of the Joint Staff now, the J7 portion of the Joint Staff. And like I said, a substantial shift in the way Joint Staff does business because of both our size and our focus, because we are not a staff. I won't call it a misnomer, but I think the emphasis for us is not on staff effort, but rather on action and production. And so let me just show you or talk to you about the wiring diagram very briefly. And I'm not sure what you can make out on it, but the important thing is this, that you have the 3-star General Flynn at the very top, and then you have the 2 lobes of the organization. And the shaded portion, which is on the right-hand side, is in Suffolk. And I'll talk to that. And on the left-hand side is the portion that remains in the Pentagon, and that's strategy and policy. And so as General Flynn has laid it out for us, that's governance and advocacy in the Pentagon, and then in Suffolk we have action. We actually have to produce some work for primarily our audiences, the combatant commands, and the services and agencies. And so and I'm not going to go into any detail with regards to the actual organization. If you want to ask questions and answers, we can do that. But what I want to convey to you is we retained what I think is essential to joint training. We retained both joint training, individual and collective, and we still have our deployable training teams that continue operating. And I'll show you a quick slide on just how we're doing and where we are. And then we have joint development. And joint development are all those things that have to deal with both experimentation and analysis that take potential deliverables and then ship them over to the training audience. And what I think is the particularly cool idea here, just because they're in the same organization doesn't actually mean they have to interact. But I've applied some heat for the fusion effort, and now we have to interact. And so if you're delivering something in joint development, it's not just I delivered a pamphlet. I concluded an experiment. That's interesting, but damn near irrelevant. We absolutely have to have it applied to the training. Primacy goes to what are we doing for our training audience. Everybody here has that. It's been said by multiple speakers. What we're trying to do here is not develop neat things just so that we can do neat things. It is for the training audience so that they can prepare themselves and be prepared and execute when called upon in an environment. And so we've got an organization that actually forces that. I also have, and I'll point out that I have a Joint Operations and Systems Environment division that I think it's one of the coolest notions that we put together because there were some inefficiencies. We were absolutely developing from scratch the environments for each one of the exercises in the training side. And for development, heck, they were doing their own thing as well. And they were developing their own environments for each one of those. No more. Now there is one-stop shopping for the operational environment that we're producing. And when it comes to joint live and constructive, joint live virtual constructive, that's what we have right there. That's the J10 network is ours. It's in Suffolk. We're the ones that manage that right now. We're the ones that also have the IO range for working for certain programs with regards to cyber, and we continue to manage that for the entire joint community. Next slide. This is my last slide, and this is my get off the stage. Just to tell you this, folks, I can't brag enough about the folks that made it through all the wickets. I said it was a year, but you can imagine that it was a very tumultuous year. We cut our size in half, more than half, in the workforce, and we had to reshape ourselves. We never closed the doors for construction or renovation. We kept producing and we kept delivering to the Joint Force throughout that period. And this slide right here just depicts all of the joint training support that's been going on, both in this fiscal year and then in the coming fiscal year. So we've got a lot going on in Suffolk. We're proudly part of the Joint Staff, and there's a lot yet to be determined. But what you do here is every bit as important as it was when there was a Joint Forces Command, and it was intimately involved in ITSEC and its contributors, because we are the repository for that training effort. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
General Rushine, thank you very much indeed. Now we'll turn to Department of Homeland Security, United States Coast Guard, Admiral Steve Melling.
Well, good morning. It's certainly a pleasure for me to be here today on behalf of the 50,000 men and women of the Coast Guard. If I could get my slide, please. Thanks. Appreciate that. I'm the commander of Coast Guard Force Readiness Command, and for the Coast Guard, we have 44 units and detachments in 17 states, and we manage what in the Coast Guard we call the human performance cycle. We start with the development of doctrine and TTP. We translate that into the training environment. I control everything from Recruit Training Center at Cape May to our high-end training at our Aviation Training Center in Mobile, Alabama, our tactical training at our Special Missions Training Center at Camp Lejeune, and everything in between. And we also have the standardization and assessment folks that then feed back into the doctrine and TTP revisions so that we can make sure that we can efficiently get information, training, capability out to the field. Obviously, prepare the force to secure the future is what we do on a daily basis. Our Commandant Admiral Papp likes to talk about the Coast Guard, and our motto is Semper Paratus, always ready. And we are always ready, but the real question is, are we always proficient? And certainly that sometimes leaves some room for discussion. We've talked about budgets a little bit here on the panel, and I would bring everyone's attention to that high-tech training device on the right side of my first slide there. That is the ultimate team training simulator. It's called the Eagle. Believe it or not, sometimes the old systems are very good, but we also have new systems as well. If you look at the lower left-hand side, that's Macondo 251. Most people in the room would probably recognize that better as Deepwater Horizon. I put that in the picture just to talk for a little bit about modeling. Generally the rest of my slides are just going to reflect on simulation. But when it comes to modeling, the way we were able to accomplish the Macondo 251 response was with some very high-tech models that mapped for us where the oil was going to flow to, what the best way to recover was going to be, and it became very, very useful for us as we moved forward. Next slide, please. Simulation, absolutely. That's a picture of one of our aviation flight simulators at our training center in Mobile, Alabama. We just recently led a contract for our new HC-144 simulator working with NOC Trace-Sysdiv, where we expect delivery of that in 2014. One of the things that we found out with bringing the HC-144 online was that we didn't initially bring the simulator online because we were trying to manage the procurement on a shoestring, and we wanted to get the operational assets, and we found out that it was very costly for us to do it that way because by not having the simulator, we had to dedicate aircraft flight hours and flight time, and we paid a price for that. So in 2014, the simulator will come online. It will be a 290-degree by 60-degree simulation, and it's going to be the first simulator that the Coast Guard has that's FAA Level D Fidelity Standard certified. Next slide, please. This is a picture of one of our helicopter simulators. We've recently upgraded the visual graphics and, to reflect a more realistic flying environment. Next slide, please. And this is our aircrew weapons trainer. It provides advanced weapons training simulation in a high fidelity multi-surface and air mission simulation, and it actually has multiple controllable threats. I had the opportunity to actually be out in San Diego and visit the Navy's gunnery simulator, and they use virtual reality. Ours actually uses hands-on projected images, and both of them, they're different, but they're similar capabilities, and they're both very efficient technologies. Obviously, we're always looking for the most efficient, most cost-effective way of delivering the capability to our folks. Next slide, please. We have, with our 144, had mission pallet simulator capability since its inception, and that's just a quick picture of that. Next slide, please. This is a picture of our command center simulators at our training center in Yorktown. In our command centers, that's also tied into our search and rescue school that we have at Yorktown, and I put this picture up there to talk a little bit about SAROPS. SAROPS is one of our modeling programs that we use to train our controllers in how to find search and rescue targets, basically to try to take the search out of search and rescue. And in fact, SAROPS has been so effective for the Coast Guard that we've been asked by countries around the world. I know when I was the 14th District Commander out in Honolulu, we on a regular basis got requests from countries around the Pacific Rim to assist them in trying to find or resolve multi-day, multi-target SAR cases from countries like the Philippines, the Republic of Vietnam, etc. Next slide, please. This is a picture of some of our Special Missions Training Center assault forces going through simulation efforts, simulating the actual rappelling of the vertical insertion, and then using simulated environments of shoot houses on the ranges. We've been able to train our high-tech tactical operators. In addition to that, at SMTC down at Courthouse Bay at Camp Lejeune, we have a firearms training simulator. Probably the most expensive advanced training that we provide, short of our aviation training, is our tactical operators. And we found that by having the firearms training simulator, we were able to reduce the amount of ammunition that was required before they went out onto the flat ranges and into the shoot houses. In fact, the multi-million-dollar training simulator paid for itself in the first year in ammunition saved. And it has the capability to go from high-end 44 millimeter grenade launch simulation, 50 cals, all the way down to 40 cal SIGs and 9 millimeter handguns. So a very efficient training simulator. Next slide, please. At our recruit training center in Cape May, we don't do live fire anymore. We do all simulation. Now, the reason we did that was it was initially brought on by bricks and mortar. Our range was just starting to get to the point that it wasn't safe to continue to operate it, and the cost to renovate the bricks and mortar was of the point that we had to weigh the cost benefit. And what we found was that the majority of our recruits, when they were going to their first operational unit, by the time they transitioned through their initial training, it had already been 6 months, and they were going to have to go back to the range to requalify anyway. So what we did was we shifted to simulation, where they got weapons familiarization, basic training in the firearms, firearm safety, range safety, and then when they get to their operational unit and are ready to go into a law enforcement or into a theater environment, then we do the range training at that point. Next slide, please. This is a graphic of Cutter Mackinac, and Cutter Mackinac is one of our icebreakers. The unique thing about Mackinac is she is restricted to operations up on the Great Lakes. In fact, when she was designed, she was built on the Great Lakes, and she's too wide. I think it was a very smart move on some of the local politicians when the design was going through. She was designed so that she is just too wide to go through the St. Lawrence Seaway locks. So she has to stay up on the Great Lakes. She will never leave the lakes. And so what we found was that on board, because her mission is to break ice and it's a restricted environment, there's actually onboard simulators to keep the crew proficient on board Mackinac during the off-season when they're not actually doing the missions. Next slide, please. Other ways that we've looked at increasing the efficiency and the proficiency of our folks at places like our training center in Petaluma. We have our ITs have troubleshooting simulators, our operations specialists have watch station simulators, and other types of high-tech simulation devices that allow them to maintain or increase their proficiency without having to have the actual equipment there on hand. Next slide, please. This is just a basic navigation simulator that we use these at Yorktown with our bosun mate A schools, our 110 operators. We also have navigation simulators at Petaluma for our new national security cutter. Next slide, please. There we go. And we also have bridge training simulators for our cadets up at the Academy in New London. Next slide. So obviously, our job is to prepare the force so we can secure the future. We want to make sure we meet mission demand both at home and continue to meet our commitments abroad. And I look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Melling. And now from the United States Navy, Admiral Randy Marr.
Still good morning. We have a deal. We're going to talk a lot, less questions. And going last, I know you don't have any more time to write down your cards. You've expended them all, so I'm safe. I am here on behalf of Vice Admiral Architzel and the 36,000 men and women of the Naval Air Systems Command. So that's the top half of me. The bottom half, I have Roto and Snack, who in this environment only need one name. They're kind of like Rihanna and Beyonce. So the NAWC Training Systems Division, I'll let them decide who's who. So let me start off by saying I'm going to repeat a lot of what you've heard, but I'm going to try and do it with a Navy twist. We are non-homogeneous, and I'm really talking to my industry partners out here. As we walk the floor for the next few days and we get to talk and discuss and your marketing, you need to remember that, excuse me, with the three major generals who I'm sharing the table with, or four major generals I'm sharing the table with, the services cannot agree on how to write that abbreviation. The services cannot agree on what time to raise the flag in the morning and take it down in the evening. We have yet to figure out how to get the exchange systems down to one organization. So presenting us a homogeneous solution is probably not going to be received very precisely by each of us. And that's a challenge that you have to face. It's a challenge that we have to admit that we give you. What works for Coast Guard aviation may not work for naval aviation, may not work for Army aviation. Slide, please. Lieutenant Theodore Ellison, 1911. It's the 100th anniversary of the birth of naval aviation. Lieutenant Ellison started off by being a flight student and later on teaching naval aviators to fly. It's up here because Lieutenant Ellison was a healthy skeptic. He believed in the future of naval aviation, but he wasn't ready to give up the Navy in order to do that. He had to find the right balance himself between the time he spent in ground school teaching students how to manipulate the aircraft before he trusted them to take it into the air. Today, the training arm of naval aviation has over 750 aircraft, and they fly more than 360,000 hours annually. Fly 360,000 hours annually. That doesn't count for the amount of time we put in training on the ground. We have sophisticated simulators available, but we're still not willing to give up those 360,000 hours. The question one might ask is, are we ever going to give them up? What portion of training hours can the Navy not expend What portion of fatigue life on the aircraft can we not expend and move those into simulators? And when are we, in uniform, going to be willing to make that change? Slide, please. NOC Training Systems Division here in Orlando was established for the purpose not only for naval aviation, but for the Navy. Led by Roto and the team, we're trying to bring all facets together. Although aviation has long depended on simulators, we understand and we are trying to apply that technology to each of our other disciplines, from the radio rooms on submarines, to the bridge simulators, to the mechanics working on aircraft and ships. Slide, please. So today, although if you ask any pilot, they'll tell you the most important thing is getting them in the air. And we have the simulators here for the Growler, the Seahawk, and the Orion. We can't neglect the fact that we have to, at the same time, train the young men and women who are maintaining those aircraft, so they have to spend less time out on the flight line, and the air traffic controllers who direct the aircraft throughout their missions. Making sure that they are equally ready, as my colleagues have said, is all part of the readiness puzzle, as much as making sure that person in the cockpit is prepared. Slide, please. Ensign Jared Hickey, young officer, is using the Conning Officer Virtual Environment Trainer. It can be programmed to replicate any ship in the Navy. Developed here at TSD, it's also used up at SWAS. But just as I said on the aircraft, whether there's one or two pilots in an airplane, on board every ship, there are only tens of people involved in the actual navigation on the bridge. The others working the radios, the power and propulsion, the guns, and the missile systems need to be trained, and we need to understand how do we make the best use of their time, because it's not free, in training them and preparing them to be ready to do their mission. Slide, please. We don't want to limit training, simulation, and education only to training. At Naval Air Systems Command, we start with modeling and simulation on the front end of a systems design. We carry that through into test, and then we deliver that capability out into the fleet. The ACETEF facility located at Patuxent River is a key component of that. Paired with the manned flight simulator, we're able to do distributed virtual environment training between Pax River, here in Orlando, and out the West Coast at our facilities in China Lake and Point Mugu. That capability to do distributed training, distributed simulation, and distributed test saves the taxpayers money, saves the United States energy, and delivers a better product to the warfighter. Slide, please. But in the end, it's all about bringing for the Navy, for naval aviation, it's all about bringing the pilots home safely and bringing the ship safely back into port. The Navy's invested $33 million in simulators from the flight hour program. We expect that'll save $119 million in training cost. The F-18, pictured here, costs $30,000 an hour to fly. An hour in a simulator, $255. There's a big difference. But there can be no difference in safety. There can be no difference in our commitment to getting the men and women who leave the port back into that port and back to their families. Slide, please. When I have the chance to get out and talk to the NOC AD workforce, especially this time of year, I always try and bring one message home. That says we work every day on reliability and improving our systems, as we work every day on survivability and making sure that those systems can bring the men and women home, as we work every day on training the men and women and preparing them and giving them the systems they need to do their jobs. We hope that nothing will happen. I get a little skeptical look. What do you mean nothing will happen? Well, Thanksgiving just behind us and Christmas coming up. I hope that as people are sitting around because of what we're doing, because of what you're doing, as people are sitting around at the Thanksgiving table and they look across the table at their brother, their mother, their father, their sister, their niece, their nephew, their cousin, who's filling a seat at the table. Maybe they've got a story about a close call, a missile that just barely missed. Maybe they don't have a story at all because they didn't know that the missile never got fired. But they're there. They're filling that seat. And it's your ability to deliver the training systems and our ability to hand them to the men and women who need to use them, to get them back into port safely, that gets them at that Thanksgiving table. So here we see the picture of the hero on the Hudson. Captain Sullenberger and crew trained many, many, many hours in the simulators. You would never do this with a real aircraft, I hope. And it was a cold January day. And although Captain Sullenberger set the plane down and most of the passengers barely got their feet wet, it wasn't only the air crew. It was the air traffic controllers who, when he declared an emergency, knew what was going to happen. It was the first responders who, through their training, knew what they needed to do. It was everyone involved all the way out into the hospitals that handled the patients coming off of the aircraft. It's all of those pieces, many small. And although we focus on Captain Sullenberger, and he deserves all the credit he gets, our responsibility is to the entire system, is to be ready for whatever, whenever, that we can't plan for because we don't know the future. Thank you. I stand by for your questions.
Thank you, Randy, very much. We only have 10 minutes remaining, so we'll get to just a few of your questions, but thank you for submitting them all. Those that I do not get to, please, I apologize, and we're sorry, just don't have the time. The first question, to the panel at large, in general. The acquisition process seems to be cumbersome and lengthy, often delivering technology less advanced than currently available by the time systems are fielded. What's being done to improve this process and shorten the gap? Anyone want to pick up on that? Randy, from the NavAir perspective, perhaps, or Brent?
Yes, sir. I'll comment briefly that, first of all, that's a statement of the obvious, and if I had the answer to that question, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. But it's extremely important, and I think that we see this every day, whether we're talking about, what we consider things that Moore's Law applies to in the cyber business, or we're talking about, in our case, for building airplanes, is that we've got a process that was designed to satisfy a lot of requirements, but not to satisfy how rapidly not only technology moves. That's not even the important thing. It's how rapidly our strategy changes. If we go back and look at what we originally designed the F-22 Raptor to do and what we eventually needed it to do, there was a lot of change in there. So we really need a fundamentally different approach to that. I would say one small example of how we can do this in a field I've recently become familiar with is in the cyber business, the information technology business, is that we've got to start writing, and I'm no contracting officer, so I don't know the terminology, but we've got to stop writing contracts for that kind of IT solution that is based on a requirement 2 years ago and that is delivered today. And it's a contract maybe where the person that was actually going to use it never had anything to do with writing the requirement, nor did they have any involvement as the system was being developed. And then once it was developed and delivered, there was no sustainment in terms of being able to modify and adapt that particular application to what you use. So I think that's an area that civilian industry has figured out how to do different. I know our friends in the Army, I was talking about readiness reporting, have figured out how to do that with their readiness reporting system in terms of having a constant way to reevaluate and make changes. And so I think, and it's a blinding flash of the obvious, is that we've got to get more adaptable so that we can set requirements and acquire systems that can adjust to not only changing technology, but changing strategy and requirement.
Okay, Red, thanks. Nick?
Well, being an acquisition guy, I guess I'll take the heat for most of this one. But what I would suggest to you is the process is pretty good if you want to build a brand spanking new, never before existing infrastructure to do some capability. But what we're experiencing today is we're a very highly technical society, that much of the infrastructure that we have in place for our homes is in existence right now, and it doesn't need to be prescribed in that level of detail. We need to leverage that, and a lot of the things that you see us doing in rapid acquisition is leveraging commercial infrastructures and just building the difference, that delta that we need in the combat units to deal with the issue. I thought one of the earlier comments today about open solutions. Our acquisition system, number 2, is designed to be competitive to the hilt. There is winner and a loser. And look at the culture we have here today. We had the sports scoreboard that was put up at the very beginning, where by nature our culture is competitive instead of partnering and open. Look at our laws. They are designed to create an environment that is uncontestable. And so it creates challenges. If we want to deal with that issue in rapid technology insertion out of force, we have to have an open environment in which we can collaborate and work with.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Next question for General Rudesheim. It relates to your the new command structure, and the question is, how sustainable do you assess your current structure to be? What, if any, changes do you think you need to make based on your experience so far?
Yeah, thanks. As far as sustainability goes, as part of the Joint Staff, we're under the same strictures as anyone else right now. So if the Joint Staff undergoes any cuts, budgetary cuts, then we have to compete with regards to that as well. And so that's just the nature of the beast, and not I think, unlike anybody else. We've been at this now. I said we've been fully operational capable for about 4 months, but in truth, we were up and running at, say, operating temperature about 2 months before that. So I'd say as much as 6 months trying this new organization. You know, again, borrowing from an often cited phrase, you know, it's not about getting it right, it's just about getting it not too wrong. And so I think that we have a good start point. The importance here is, I mean, our measure of effectiveness, our number one measure of effectiveness is whether we are satisfying the needs of the joint warfighter. And that's pretty squishy, but you can get into some specifics. And we are getting into specific metrics below that. So far, so good. There's going to be a review in about a year, from FOC. So maybe about next August, July-August timeframe. There's going to be a chairman's review of our current structure, and we're going to make some decisions on whether it continues as is or changes. Will there be changes? Yes. I can't get into the specifics right now, but I'm not trying to sidestep it as much as just tell you we don't have the specifics right now. We're still working through it. We took the training wheels off just a few months ago. So one of our biggest challenges right now is just how we interact with the Joint Staff portion of J7 in the Pentagon, and how it is that we receive the demand signal from the services and the combatant commands. And so that may be one of the places that I see some changes coming in the future. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, General. For General Fox, sir, you spoke about mandating technology for live training and how simulations can substitute for exercises or sorties. How can industry help with this, and what policy changes are required?
Well, I just think we have to do leadership. You know, we have to decide that you know the Iron Majors don't get to decide what technologies they use for the training and how much they use it. It really needs to be decided by the service leads, that with a body of experts that decides this technology is good enough to, you know, suffice for this many controls for JTAC certification. So it's just a matter of taking somebody who's done it enough and who can go in a simulator and then realize probably some beta tests with some people from different backgrounds to see how it works. But it's just back to, you know, we you know, my good friend from the Navy talked about how uncompatible we are at times. Well, we got to get beyond that. You know, we've done a lot of stuff with the Army. We kind of smell like the Army the last 10 years, you know, and so a lot of our simulation looks very much like the Army's. A lot of our naval aviation obviously is tied to the Navy. But I was very impressed by what the Coast Guard talked about here. And did any of us, the rest of us, service, take advantage of that technology to reduce our expenses. So I think we just got to get beyond our service parochialism at time and decide that, hey, Major, you're going to do this. Battalion Commander, you're going to do this, because these are tough times. Because at the end of the day, we're not going to have enough money to train every unit, so we better make sure we spread it the right way. So we've got everybody trained to a level that we can, look the Secretary of Defense in the eye and say this unit is ready to go do whatever they have to do.
Thank you, General Fox. This is for the panel at large, but perhaps General Rudersheim, maybe Dr. Junior, you might want to comment on it. It relates to coalition training, but and ITSEC is truly an international event. People here from around the world, but so this addresses a piece of of coalition training. Joint and coalition cooperation is great, but how do we deal with different security levels and technical standards both inside and outside of NATO?
There's a ping pong ball going in front of me. What is
Listen,
this?
first of all, we need to expand the aperture on this because it's not just about NATO, right?
Definitely.
So that's point number one. We could work through this. I said we have 29 LNOs from 19 countries. They don't get involved in everything we do because of the restrictions on levels of security at times. But we're working on training environments and platforms, virtual constructive, live virtual constructive, that allow us to train with partners throughout the world. And, I don't want to open a can of worms, but we get the Afghan Mission Network that is, after Afghanistan, we're going to have a mission network. And so we are looking at how it is that you call, and we're part of it. It's not we by ourselves by any stretch. It's a federation of folks, but we're participating in an effort to look at how it is that we can bring folks together. By the way, anybody that knows Afghan Mission Network, and I know there's a lot of them in the room that know more about it than me, know that it's not a network in itself. It's a federation. It's cobbled together in order to bring things together and enhance cooperation. That's what we are going to have to do. We're really having to look for ways to put in guards so that if there are parts of networks that have to remain protected, they can do that, but you need to share as much as possible. So in conclusion for me, I just tell you that it's a thorny issue as always, but the fact that we have coalition partners from not just NATO but across the world participating, I think it goes a long way to solving it, and they're working with us on it right now.
Thank you, General.
I agree. This is not a new problem, and it's not one that's just pertinent to the idea of working with partners. I helped create the Defense Readiness Reporting System, and even within the Pentagon, the rights and permissions and the sharing of data was dreadful to overcome. But I tell you, there's two parts to it. There's the IT part that I think clever minds, not my own, but clever minds can figure out. But worse than that is the cultural part, where on some level we're kind of reluctant to share. Sharing's good unless I'm the one doing it. And I think that's something we're going to have to contend with. And nothing is going to get us past that more than just working with each other more. Even when we built DERS, we had this grand scheme of web service enabling the data, and it would just talk to each other, and it'd be seamless, and it would be beautiful and easy. We're still sneakernetting some of this stuff. And the point there is, while though that is not an acceptable solution for the long run, we didn't let it stop us. Working with our joint partners is more important than, again, admiring how hard this problem is. We can figure it out. We just sort of have to put our noses down and do it.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Junior. Ladies and gentlemen, we're getting into the lunch hour right now, and I'm sorry that we're not able to get to the other really excellent questions that you sent up here to me. But how about a big round of applause to these great Americans? who shared with you their views, and thank them for their candor. Thank you all very, very much indeed. Welcome again to ITSEC 2011, and enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you all very much.